honoring our heroes in Black history. And you learn by listening. And when I look at our group, I see a lot of good scholars, including three that I will personally like to introduce at the end of this program. I would like to introduce to you one of the youngest members of our association. When I say association, I refer to the members of this institution. I'd like for you to come up. Come on up to the stage. One of our MCs for the day is on his way from California, and he will not be able to make it in time. This is one of our newest members of the board of directors of this institution. And I'm going to let him introduce himself, and he will begin our program by introducing the participants.
Good afternoon, everyone. Apologize for that. My name is AJ Justice, and I'm the media specialist, and I'm also a board member, like Mr. Taylor said, one of the youngest board members of the Chipman Cultural Center. So without further ado, let's get along with the program. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Tyrone Taylor, who is currently a professor at Warwick Community College, and he is also the brother of one of our presenters, Yvette Taylor. So without further ado, I would like Dr. Tyrone Taylor to please come up.
Good afternoon, everyone. You see all these wonderful faces. But the first thing I'd like to do is give a little moment of silence for the victims down in Florida. We had that shooting, and you know, I think about 18 people lost their lives, which is a tragedy. It's a different world that we live in today, and so we all have to be very cautious and be careful where we tend to tread, because we never know what's going to happen. But we just a moment of silence for them. Okay. Well, I have the pleasure this afternoon of introducing one of our speakers, and happens to be as we all know, my sister, Miss Talani, Deborah Talani Saladin. And I was reading her biography, and it amazed me all the things that she was doing that I wasn't aware of. So I'll read it to you. Deborah Talani Saladin is a museum specialist in curatorial affairs. And I actually had to look that up and see what that was, curatorial affairs, at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. She is part of a creative curatorial team which has developed a multimedia exhibition on the organizations, institutions, and activism that ensures African American survival and progress from the 20th century to present. For this Making a Way Out of No Way gallery, she developed content and collected key exhibit elements, artifacts, photographs, audiovisuals, and graphics. She also collected artifacts for the Slavery and Freedom and military galleries. For the museum's future documentation of social justice causes, Ms. Saladin has collected objects associated with the Black Lives Matter injustice and community cleanup efforts after the uprising. Researching and writing about historical figures, social movements, and historic events covering various time periods, and collecting material culture have been a central part of her work with numerous museums. Number one museum being the Booker T. Washington Monument in Hardy, Virginia, the Reginald F. Lewis Museum, and Great Blacks in Wax Museum, both of which are in Baltimore, Maryland. Developing her career along dual lines, 2 lines, okay. Ms. Saladin is also a 10-year member, 1997 to 2007, of the Morgan State University faculty, Department of English and Language Arts. She taught basic and advanced composition, research methods, and African American literature. Her research interests included the effects of topic variation on the writing performance of basic writers. At Morgan, she also cultivated her interest in the life and work of activist and writer James Baldwin, whose story she helped feature in the Making a Way Out of No Way gallery. Ms. Saladin earned a Bachelor of Art degree in English from Coppin State University and a Master's of Art in Rhetoric and Composition from Salisbury University. Let's give a warm welcome to my sister and our guest speaker, Ms. Deborah Talani Saladin.
Good afternoon, family and friends, and I literally mean that. I think everybody in here is related to me in some kind of way. So my dad had reached out to me months ago and said, I'm doing my Black History program again, you're gonna participate? And of course, when my dad asked me to do anything, my answer is always yes. So I'd like to thank my dad for the invitation. I'd like to thank the board. I'd like to thank the committee, anyone responsible for inviting me to be here today. It's always a pleasure to come and talk about the Smithsonian's newest kid on the block, the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And I'm going to tell you, we've been open for over a year now. We have had over 3 million visitors. And when I say, yes, absolutely. And when I say that the museum has become a place of pilgrimage for people, I'm not exaggerating. It's a place of pilgrimage. People come from all over the world to the museum, from all over the United States. I often walk downstairs into the galleries and interface with the people, and I talk to them and I ask them, where they're from. And they're always, very anxious to share with me what in the museum really resonated with them. One day I walked down to the Making a Way Out of No Way gallery, and there was a lady having her picture taken in front of one of the exhibits that I had developed. And so I walked up to her and I said, are you familiar with this hospital? This was the Homer G. Phillips Hospital in St. Louis, Missouri, which was the premier segregated hospital in St. Louis. And she said, oh, not only am I familiar with that hospital, I was born in that hospital 62 years ago. And so it's those kind of stories. People find something that resonates directly with their own personal experiences or experiences of people that they know. So if you have not been to the museum, please make sure you come and visit. The Smithsonian museums are free, open to the public every day of the week. Our only issue is that we have had such a rush of people, we had to institute a pass system. But normally you just walk in, and once things slow down a little bit, you'll be able to do that. But for now, you do have to go online and get your free passes in order to get in, so we can control the crowds. The first week that we opened, really the first month, it got so crowded we would have a bottleneck down in the Slavery and Freedom Gallery. And so that's when we instituted the time pass system. So please come if you haven't already done so. And so this is African American, we call it National African American History Month. And I was happy when I used to hear Barack Obama, when he was in office, say National African American History Month, because we're kind of elevating the language a little bit. African American has become the preferred nomenclature or name for people in the United States of African descent. And so the month also is nationally recognized. So we say National African American History Month. And so 365 days a year at the museum, we are celebrating African American history and culture. And so today I'm going to talk just about a segment of the Slavery and Freedom Gallery. I'm going to focus on two of the major heroes of our history during the slavery era. Probably the most noted two, and there are really three that we always hear about. You're going to name the third. I'm going to name the two that I'm going to focus on today. That would be Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman, both of whom hail from the eastern shore of Maryland. And I love telling big city folks who come to the museum that, you know, I'm from the eastern shore of Maryland. I say, you heard of Frederick Douglass? You heard of Harriet Tubman? That's where I'm from, same place they're from. And you know, they don't know that, you know, the eastern shore has been dubbed the cradle of emancipation because of these two figures. Now, who is the third figure that is most noted from the slavery era that we always hear about? You hear about Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, and who's the third? This is the professor coming out in me now. Yeah. little class participation. Clue, it's a woman. Slavery era. Another woman besides Harriet Tubman. Slavery era. Slavery. AJ just said it. All right. Sojourner Truth. Ain't I a Woman? A poem she wrote. Ain't I a Woman? That was just your little quiz for the day. All right. So we're going to start. I need the PowerPoint. My brother, my baby brother. He cringes when I say that. He mentioned that I collect artifacts. That's a big part of my work there, probably about 50% of what I do, collecting artifacts. So today I'm going to talk with you about the artifacts and photographs that we have collected and put on display that are associated with Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass. Artifacts and photographs associated with Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass are integral part of the National Collection and inaugural exhibition at the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. In the Slavery and Freedom Gallery, these materials document Harriet Tubman as a woman divinely inspired to seize freedom and internationally recognized as an unrelenting abolitionist who freed hundreds of enslaved people. Fiercely religious, her dreams and her visions provided a moral compass throughout her life. Similarly, the materials displayed in the Slavery and Freedom Gallery underscore the life and works of Frederick Douglass. His writings helped to establish the slave narrative as the foundation of an African American literary tradition. Through his oratory and leadership, he promoted solidarity among abolitionists, full citizenship for African Americans, and democracy for all people. Frederick Douglass. Through my PowerPoint presentation, I will share with you images of specific artifacts and photographs at the museum that help us to tell the compelling story of these two highly influential historical figures. They are of local, national, and international stature. These images represent collections on display, and a few of them are in storage, including the newly acquired Harriet Tubman materials that were an unprecedented collaborative purchase with the Library of Congress. So, Harriet Tubman, born circa 1822, died in 1913. She was an abolitionist, Civil War nurse, a spy, and a scout. She was also a tremendous advocate for women's suffrage and an advocate for the elderly. Now, this is a quote by Harriet Tubman. It's on the wall. This is inside the Slavery and Freedom Gallery. I know the light is kind of fading the image out a little bit on the screen. But what you're looking at here is a huge wall in the Slavery and Freedom Gallery. And on this wall, I think there's a pointer, is this particular quote, and I'll read it for you. It says, "God's time is always near. He gave me strength, and he set the North Star in the heavens. He meant that I should be free." So that's what that quote says. Underneath the quote, you see we place different acts that are related to the nation's legal battle over the issue of slavery. So you have these legal battles going on, and then you have the voice of Harriet Tubman professing freedom, the need for freedom for the enslaved. This is a shawl that Queen Victoria of England gave to Harriet Tubman. It's a silk, lace, and linen shawl made in about 1897. This was a gift to the museum by an African-American collector named Charles Blockson. And we were just fascinated. The director of the museum, Mr. Lonnie Bunch, when this Mr. Blockson reached out to us, Lonnie couldn't believe that these materials associated with Harriet Tubman actually existed, because it's very difficult to find artifacts from the slavery era because it was so long ago, obviously, and things deteriorate. And so we were just elated to receive this shawl. We were also elated to receive from that same collection from Mr. Blockson this gospel hymnal that belonged to Harriet Tubman. So that is on display. The condition of this hymnal suggests that Harriet Tubman used it frequently. This is the hymnal displayed on a cradle, opened. And this is a photograph of Harriet Tubman probably at her home in Auburn, New York. We know that after she left the Eastern Shore, Dorchester County, Cambridge, that area there, she ended up in New York. And we see that she is wearing a shawl, not that particular one, but she wore shawls, so it was quite an appropriate gift from Queen Victoria. And that's just another image of the shawl on display. This is what's called a carte de visite. It's a type of photograph It's of Harriet Tubman as a younger woman. We don't see this particular one that often. It's about 1868. We're talking 3 years after emancipation. Slavery ended in 1865. This photograph is one of 44 rare photographs in an album acquired through a collaborative purchase between our museum and the Library of Congress. And that purchase was made in 2017. And you know, it was really an unprecedented purchase. I can't even remember exactly how much we paid for it in conjunction with the Library of Congress. But how many of you know that for the first time we have an African American as the director of the Library of Congress? Her name is Dr. Carla Hayden, a woman. So we worked with her to get that purchase. And this is that beautiful album. So that photograph of her, along with a number of other photographs, were inside that album, photo album. The original owner of this album was a woman by the name of Emily Howland. She was a Quaker school teacher. She helped establish 50 schools for emancipated children. She was a close friend of Harriet Tubman's. That's how she got the picture. After Tubman settled in New York. A collector, the book ended up in the hands of a collector, and then that collector sold it to the Swan Auction House about 30 years ago. So the Swan Auction House had it 30 years, and we purchased it from Swan. So that's Miss Harriet Tubman. Frederick Douglass also has a wall quote. Frederick Douglass, they say, is probably the most photographed man in United States history. Most photographed. And I would say that in our museum, he is probably the most quoted. So this is a quote from Frederick Douglass. He said, "We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed, and its crimes must be denounced." 1852. And his quote, just like Harriet Tubman's quote, is on a very, very tall wall, and it too sits over those laws, those acts that I mentioned, that reflect the nation's debate over the issue of slavery. This is an image of Frederick Douglass. He chose this image for his first narrative, which was published in 1845. I want to say something about, you know, these slave narratives were so critical to helping lay the foundation of an African American literary tradition. You know, the enslaved people wrote about everything they went through. They wrote about the minute details of what they ate, how much food they were given, how much clothing they were given, how they were treated by their masters, how they were treated by the wives of their masters, how they bound together the enslaved just to survive, what their living conditions were like, you know, what was the inside of a slave house like. They wrote about their joys, they wrote about their creativity, they wrote about their opportunities that they snatched to celebrate being alive. They wrote about their struggle for freedom. All of these are detailed in these slave narratives, and without these accounts, we would not have that first person perspective, that vantage point from which to understand the history of enslaved people in these United States. So it was critical, these narratives, and they remain critical because they are the first person account of what slavery was really like from the vantage point of the enslaved, not from the vantage point of the slave master, which is the vantage point with which we're more familiar, because these accounts are in history books. And of course, the account would be different, would it not, from the enslaved versus the enslaver. The enslaver is going to see the experience totally different, presented in a way that says slavery was not that bad, that there was some sort of benevolence in the institution of slavery, that had not slaves been brought here, heaven help, they would still be savages in Africa. And this was a myth that was perpetuated, and it was based on the vantage point of the enslavers. So to have this counterpoint is so critical. This is that first edition, and these are first editions, so they're in cases inside the museum. This one is titled The Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave, 1845 it was published. And again, he chose that particular image. He wanted that image there on the inside. That's the front cover. He wrote a second narrative. The second one was titled My Bondage and My Freedom. That was published in 1857. And he expounds heavily on his early life, and he augments many of the very, very intriguing points that he had mentioned in his first book. He just elaborates a bit more, goes into more detail in the second book. It addresses his attempts to escape and his first involvement in the abolitionist movement. Frederick Douglass helped to publish a newspaper called the North Star in 1848. There's a quote, well, he established, well, actually in 1847, it began, and the first print came out the following year, 1848. It was edited by Douglass and by Martin Delany, the man considered to be the father of black nationalism, Martin Delany. It was the most influential anti-slavery newspaper. Over 4,000 readers in the United States, in Europe, and in the West Indies. In 1851, the paper merged with the Liberty Party paper of Syracuse, and the paper was renamed the Frederick Douglass paper until 1860. And there's a quote, I think this is from Douglass: "It has long been our anxious wish to see in this slave-holding, slave-trading, and Negro-hating land a printing press and newspaper permanently established under the complete control and direction of the immediate victims of slavery and oppression." And that is what that paper addressed. And we know that not all enslaved people, most of them did not know how to read and write. They were tortured if they attempted to learn how to read and write. but Frederick Douglass did manage, and it says that while enslaved in Baltimore, he taught himself how to write by copying the letters from shipping labels he saw in the shipyard. And so this is an example. This is not the one he actually used, but this is an example of a stencil like the one that he used in order to teach himself. And he was determined that he was going to learn how to read and write. And that is the last object. Yep, that is the last object. So if you come to the museum and you go to the Slavery and Freedom Gallery, you will see these authentic artifacts on display. And I think that's all I want to say about these two major abolitionists, heroes, freedom fighters of African American history and culture. Thank you. Now, I'm going to go ahead and move right into something because of the weather report my dad had mentioned. My sister Yvette was on the program to talk about Rosa Parks. So she called me and she said, I'm not going to make it. Can you say something about Rosa Parks? So I think I'll just, while I'm up here, just go on and segue into Rosa Parks. And let's be totally clear, we're shifting gears here. We're moving into a whole nother century, Rosa Parks, the mid-20th century. During the civil rights era, Rosa Parks became known as the woman who refused to give up her seat on the bus in Montgomery, Alabama. And as a result, she helped to spark the Montgomery bus boycott. But a word about Rosa. How it all started. This is Rosa's voice. One evening in early December 1955, I was sitting in the front seat of the colored section, exactly where she was supposed to be sitting, by law. This bus in Montgomery, Alabama, the white people were sitting in the white section, just where they were supposed to be sitting according to law. More white people got on, and they filled up all the seats in the white section. When that happened, we black people were supposed to give up our seats and allow them to sit down. But I didn't move. The white driver said, "Let me have those front seats." I answered, "You may arrest me if you must." Two white policemen came. I asked one of them, "Why do you push us all around?" He answered, "I don't know, but the law is the law, and you're under arrest." For half of my life, there were laws and customs in the South that kept African Americans segregated from Caucasians and allowed white people to treat black people without any respect. I never thought this was fair, and from the time I was a child, I tried to protest against disrespectful treatment. But it was very hard to do anything about segregation and racism when white people had the power of the law behind them. Somehow, we had to change the laws. And we had to get enough white people on our side to be able to succeed. I had no idea when I refused to give up my seat on that Montgomery bus that my small action would help put an end to the segregation laws in the South. I only knew that I was tired of being pushed around. I was a regular person, just as good as anybody else. There had been a few times in my life when I had been treated by white people just like a regular person. So I knew what that could feel like. It was time that other white people started treating me that way. And so those are the words of Rosa Parks. And there is a quote in the museum by Rosa Parks. It is in an exhibit on Emmett Till. Hands high if you heard that name. Emmett Till. Okay, a few of you have heard of Emmett Till. 14-year-old boy from Chicago, Illinois. Living in Chicago with his mother, typical urban child. Mother feels the need to send this boy down south, live with his family down south in Money, Mississippi. And they tell him, Emmett, when you go down there, don't be carrying on now. You're going to Mississippi. It's not Chicago. But Emmett was a 14-year-old jovial kid, and he goes down there, and it didn't take much for white people to be offended by African Americans, but Emmett did something that offended a woman, Carolyn Bryant, who was a store owner there. They say that he whistled at her. And of course, before the night was over, Emmett was being dragged from his bed, and he was taken by men and beaten severely to death. And his body was recovered sometime later in the Mississippi River, and it was unrecognizable. This event occurred in 1955 as well. Rosa Parks' event occurred in December 1955. Emmett Till's mother decided that she was going to publish the pictures of her son in Jet magazine. Jet magazine was very popular, as it has been. And everybody got to see these images of this 14-year-old baby who had been beaten, murdered, lynched. And she said, "Let the world see what I have seen. Let them see." And so this national event fueled the activism of people throughout the nation, the killing of Emmett Till, the NAACP and Rosa Parks notwithstanding. Rosa Parks' quote is on the wall in the Emmett Till gallery, and she says, in short, that it was the killing of Emmett Till that gave me the courage to not give up my seat on that bus that day. So, you know, it's all connected, these events, and they all served as an impetus to ultimately institute these desegregation laws. The words that I read from Rosa Parks, these are the simple yet eloquent words of Rosa Parks, who on December 1st, 1955, refused to give up her seat to a white man on a segregated bus, sparking the Montgomery, Alabama bus boycott. A year later, when the boycott was over, there was a federal injunction against segregation on buses. 1 year. So when a person thinks that I'm just one person, I can't make a difference, you have to rethink that. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a national figure. Nation hadn't heard of no Martin Luther King Jr. until this major event, the Montgomery bus boycott. And the civil rights movement became a national cause. Thank you very much.
And now we will have a poetry presentation delivered by Jennifer Mitchell. Jennifer Mitchell is a senior community outreach specialist at Delmarva Power. She has been employed there for 18 years, and she is very much noted for her dramatic poetry presentation. And her parents are Jerome and Josephine Mitchell.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. I call this poem Food for Thought. Black history. Well, what about her story? As they tell their story, it's supposed to be our story. Love thy neighbor as thyself, but are we more concerned about power, titles, prestige, and wealth? Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Remember your struggles and what you've been through. Never judge, because you know it could have been you. Embrace every person, every tribe, every life. Pick up love and unity, lay down division and strife. As we pump our fist and pick out our hair, reach back with love and pull up another if you dare. Because real power, real legacy reaches for humanity over race. When we look at one another, seeing our very own face, fighting the power of evil. And yes, what happened to Emmett Till? What happened to Sandra Bland? What happened to Trayvon Martin? What happened to many young black women and black men was evil. Racial injustice and inequality is evil. But we can fight the power of evil and make the world a better place. And you ask, how? Well, see, we're equipped with knowledge, power, and wisdom. We have all that we need to walk in love and change the world, knowing when you bleed, I bleed. Black history, absolutely. But let's not forget about her story. As they tell their story, it's supposed to be our story.
And now we will have the song I Am Free, sung by Howard Mooney Robinson.
Apologize for being late. I was at my wife's cousin's funeral down in Virginia. And I got matter of fact, my phone was off. And when I got home, I realized it was off. I got a call. I didn't recognize the number, but I did answer it and said, are you coming? And lo and behold, I'm glad I got the phone call because it had really slipped my mind. I'm like most folks, charge it to my head and not to my heart. I'm free. Thank you, Jesus, I'm free. No longer bound, no more chains holding me. My soul is resting. It's just a blessing, but praise the Lord, hallelujah, I'm free. I'll stay with you just as long as I could, trying to do all the good things that I should, but my Savior's waiting. He's calling for me, but praise the Lord, hallelujah, I'm free. I have tried, Lord, I tried to do my best. I'm going home one day. I'm gonna sit down and take my rest. My friends are waiting by the Sea of Galilee. But praise the Lord, hallelujah, I'm free. I am going where the streets are paved with gold. I'm going where you know the half ain't never been told. My Father promised He'd be waiting there for me. But praise the Lord, hallelujah, I'm free.
One of the things I like to do is hear him sing. I tell you, this is the 5th time that he has given the pleasure to us of singing our freedom song. I took that name from your song. You don't mind me doing that. The freedom song, it fits in perfectly, and so does his voice. I really appreciate you picking that phone up and getting up here as soon as you did. Thank you very much. After I finish what I'm going to do now, we're going to have a little supper. We'll go downstairs at the end of the next thing that I do and have some food. Right now, I have some guests, 4 of them. This special guest, especially to me, in the year of 1948, 80 of us stood together and honored the man who owned at one time this building. You'll see his picture when you go downstairs. And I want you to look closely because you're going to see the picture of 80 other people. And I want you to go and look at that picture very closely and see if you can remember seeing any of your relatives on the picture. I'm going to put that on display, and I'm going to ask those 4 people if they will stagger forward. I wish you would come forward, and I'm getting 4 chairs, and I'm including myself as one of those 4 people. Display it downstairs while you have lunch. Thank you for volunteering to be the first one, Julia.
I'm Julia Bailey Burkhead, from Chipman. That's where I reside. I attended all the schools here. I now reside with my daughter in Bowie, Maryland. Classmates, at first we used to get together every year. As we got older, then it became maybe every 5 years. One other classmate think we lost, I think you mentioned his name, James Turner. Yes, he was from Nanticoke, Maryland. We were from all over the county, and we were a very close-knit group. And if anything happened in a family, somebody passed or whatnot, all the classmates usually showed up, and with someone in the class would have something to say. And lots of times they would put it on me. I was always the quiet one. All right.
Oh, my name is Roy Cosby. I became from Sharptown, San Domingo, as they call it now. I was just thinking, Ed said there was 80 of us. I was thinking just back, this past 2 years, we lost 4 men. 4 of our classmates were men. James Turner, Robert Bailey, Sonny Boy, and Leroy White. I just think that's 4 in 2 years. Our class is getting smaller. We used to have every year we would take some kind of outing. Road trip, we went to the Smith Islands, and we went to Hurlock and Eastern Market. Had the boat, had dinner out there on the boat. Yeah, so we had the good years, but it's not many of us left now. Yeah.
Good afternoon. I'm certainly glad that my classmate invited me here today. It really inspires me with the Black history. And then when he put the 1948 class reunion to the tail of it, that really got me, because we had a good time all through the years, and we met until a lot of us got sickly and poorly. So we thank God that he has been with us all these years, and we just have to give God the praises, because nobody has done it really but the Lord. And I ask him to continue the few that is left. And I think I promised Mr. Taylor to count how many we did have left, but I haven't had time yet to even count how many is left, but it's not very many of us. But to the ones that is left, I wish them success in life, and thank you for listening. My name is Aline Ennis, Aline Elze Ennis. I'm from the Rockawalking Hebron District, and I'm proud of my hometown. Thank you.
I'm really happy. I didn't expect to see everybody, especially, I said, Julia won't come all the way down here just for this, and look at her. She did, she came. And I'm glad, when I got here, listen to this one, I got here this morning at 11:30. Roy was here waiting. Now, he was very much into doing what we're doing today. I have a sad thing to report. Leroy White died tragically a few months ago. He played the part of a slave 4 times for our program. He had planned to be here today. And Julia and I spoke at his funeral. And it was very sad. It was sadder than any of the others who we lost. because of the way we network with each other. I don't want to get involved in speeches because I can't talk, but I want to say, that's my niece. That is my niece. I want you to know that was my niece. And I've listened to a lot of her poems, and I look forward to seeing a book of poems. And you know who to contact. Not me, but Debbie also authored a book of poems when she was about your age. And you and her can form a partnership. And people will be talking about you 70 years from now like they're talking about us. Could I get a song, a closing song, led by Charlie Gosley? Oh, he is here. He's here. Let us close. Somebody's hand made this world a better place if you can. Thank you, Charles. I would like for you to enjoy the museum downstairs. I was looking around this morning, and it's things that I read this morning that I didn't even know, just from walking around through this museum. So please take advantage of that. And I must apologize. We locked ourselves out of the elevator. So, but I was proud to see these old folks come up those steps. You did a good job. Thank you. And maybe we'll do the same thing again next year.